Welcome back to the Carlisle Med Gym. We're here with week 10 of our core exercise series, and we've been taking you along through some different core exercise progressions, talking about different stability patterns that we like to work on. And again, to recap a little bit, we've talked a lot about training the core for first and foremost spine health, so not doing a lot of things that encourage bending, twisting of the spine, as well as we've been talking about training the core for optimal performance, which again, the core works a little differently than the rest of the body. The core works to stabilize and transfer force, not necessarily to create power and force. And so as we go through these different progressions, we're giving you some different options, and we're starting to work on some a little more challenging progressions now as we get towards the end of the series here. And so today we're going to go into a couple of new exercises, and we're going to show you some that are maybe not so common in the fitness world, but they really branch out of the rehab world, and that's the chop and lift patterns. And so we're going to show you half kneeling chop and lift patterns, and we can do these with cables, we can do it with bands, and we'll show you a few different options today. But really these serve a lot of different purposes. But number one, the chop pattern is coming high to low, moving the arms, and the lift pattern is coming low to high, moving the arms. And so you get a little bit of shoulder movement, but again, we're focusing on the core stability while you do that diagonal shoulder pattern. And so when you move the upper extremities in that pattern, what you really need to do is to engage the core reflexively to not allow the back to arch or extend or flex or twist, and you'll see this as we demonstrate these exercises. So we're talking a little bit more about the reflexive core stabilization against upper extremity movement. And when we do it in a half kneeling and a tall kneeling pattern, which we'll show you in a minute, we're really taking out now the base of support that you get from a standing position, and now we're going to force you to use some of the smaller stabilizing muscles of the hips and the core and things that we don't really use every day. So we want to again take a look at these, train them, and start integrating them into the core exercise routine. So we'll take a minute here. I want to go out and show you a few different options for chopping and lifting patterns, and we'll see what they look like. So we're going to show you a couple of chop and lift patterns out here on the floor, and I want to give you a couple different options for performing them in case you don't have the same equipment that we have, or you don't have a cable machine that you have access to. So we can do it with cables or bands, but first thing to talk about is the setup for these, because that's the crucial piece. So when you set up in a tall kneeling or half kneeling posture, these are known as kind of transitional postures between some of the more floor-based posture or patterns of supine, bridging, rolling, crawling, those types of things, all the way up to the high-level patterns of standing, walking, things that we develop up to as we grow. But transitional postures, tall kneeling, half kneeling, are really good for taking a step back and working on the fine motor control of the core and the hips when you can't use the feet and the lower legs to compensate away from that. So the tall kneeling posture, you'll notice I'm set up here, your knees about shoulder width apart, and you want to have ears on top of shoulders, on top of hips, on top of knees. So that way you're making sure you're not compensating away from using some of these core stabilizers as you're in this posture. So tall kneeling first, then half kneeling is another way to challenge this. And so now we're taking the base of support and going a little more narrow. And so now we're not necessarily challenging as much anterior and posterior stability as we are challenging lateral stability of this pattern. So we're going to take these patterns and we're going to go into a chop and lift, and we'll start with a cable bar here. So tall kneeling, you're going to grab this cable bar, hands split out apart a little bit, and you want it basically as high up as you can get it there, so it's more of a diagonal, vertical, high to low pattern. And so we're going to get that position locked in at the core, braced, come down to the chest, and press diagonally down and away, and then back up. So again, you're coming here, pressing under control. And as I do that pattern, now I got to use the core to stabilize and resist any kind of twisting, or as I come down, any kind of extension pushing me back away from that stability at the core that I want to maintain. So we have an option to chop there. We can also take the cable to the bottom and go with more of the lift pattern. So with the lift, you're going to go low to high. So starting here, again, same thing, hips underneath your shoulders, core locked in place, and you're coming up to the chest, pressing vertically and diagonally across the body. So this gives a good bit of shoulder challenge. This is a little bit more work than chopping low to high, because you got to go against gravity. But again, the same principles apply of not letting it throw you backwards or twist you or throw you into extension. So let's go over here, we'll take a look at the rope. And same idea, I'm going to demonstrate the half kneeling posture with the rope. So the rope just adds a little different layer of challenge to it, so you don't have the fixed bar. You got to use the hands a little more independently. But either way, if you have a rope, if you don't have a rope, you can use a bar. But we're going to do half kneeling. So as you notice, I set up for this one, I'm trying to get as narrow as I can maintain, as I can control. So I'm up on the back toe, my knee is underneath my hip, I'm not hanging back here. So I'm extended through the hip, hip is under the shoulder, shoulder is under the ear. This is not turned out to compensate for lack of stability. I'm trying to maintain perfectly lined up position. And we're just going to maintain that now as we come down and chop. So as I get down and press out, I'm starting to feel it want to throw me here. So I got to really lock in that position and stabilize. Same thing you can do low to high. With that, you're just going to switch legs. So now the down leg is here and you're open over the low portion and coming up. So one more option, I'm going to show you some bands over here. So there's a lot of different types of bands. These are actually Gray Cook bands meant to go with a functional movement screen for corrective exercises. They work really well for this, but you can really set this up with any type of band that's long enough and that's a good resistance for you. So same idea. The only difference with the bands is that we can start to make this a little more dynamic and a little more of a challenge by varying the resistance. As it gets farther out, it becomes harder, as well as we can start to make this a little more dynamic, meaning fast and not so slow and controlled with the cable. So we're going here, chop, back up, chop, back up. Half kneeling, a little harder, chop, and back up. And finally, a tall kneeling and half kneeling lift. Again, probably the hardest pattern to go through, going fast up and across, working on dynamic stability of the core as I work through that shoulder pattern. Outside leg up for half kneeling, coming up and trying again, get as narrow as I can maintain without compensating. So that gives you a few options for challenging this chop and lift pattern to, again, reflexively stabilize the core. And again, you can do it with a cable bar, a rope on a cable attachment. You can do it with bands, and again, challenge yourself in a few different ways.